We're continuing today in 1 Samuel chapter 25. We're going to be answering the questions and then proceeding from there. Would anybody need a copy of the question sheet that says 1 Samuel 24 and also 1 Samuel 25? We've answered those on 24. Anybody? Raise your hand. Zelda? Anybody else? Okay. I just learned, in addition to others that we know of, that Daryl was right at the point this morning of leaving for services here, and was sick and unable to come, so Daryl is at home. He's not supposed to do that, but that's the case this morning. So that's a rare thing. I showed you recently this photo of En-Gedi because this is the site in 1 Samuel 24 where David was hiding from Saul. And what you see in this photo is the rugged terrain of the desert area. You also see some greenery. Whenever you're in the desert and you see some greenery, that's always a sign of water. And so the water flows from those waterfalls that I showed you. But anyway, I made the point on the photo that I was showing. I said, as you look here, the Dead Sea is over there. It's just kind of hard to see. And Nancy Piconia asked me to send her the photo. She enhanced it a little bit. And you can see it's kind of faded right there. But from En-Gedi, it's just right on the shore of the Dead Sea. So that blue you're seeing right there, that's actually the Dead Sea. So she did that little bit of enhancing and sent it back to me where maybe you can see that just a little bit better. I want to adjust that just a little bit there. See if we can bring that out a little bit. Sort of like that. Is that better? I like just every once in a while to pause and see where we are. Do you like to see where you are and look around and see what's around you? Do you like to do that? And so this is the Old Testament from beginning to end. And we have covered the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is the Pentateuch. And once we made the transition from Moses to Joshua in the book of Joshua, we enter that period of conquest, and then that period of Judges, which took us all the way through Samuel, who dies. And Hank mentioned several things in 1 Samuel 25, verse 1, looking back over Samuel at that really epic event. It was the end of an era when Samuel died. So, but earlier, or before his death, of course, Saul had been appointed in 1 Samuel chapter 9. That began the period known as the United Kingdom. And so with the United Kingdom, you've got Saul, David, and Solomon, and that's where we are right now. Now, when Solomon dies, you're going to have, as punitive action, God is going to take away much of the dynasty from Solomon's, much of the reign from Solomon's dynasty, is the way I should word that. What that means is the kingdom divided, so Solomon's son, Rehoboam, continues to reign to the south, and the Davidic line, in other words, the descendants of David through Solomon, continue all the way through with the reigns of the kings of Judah, all the way to the end. But starting with Jeroboam, you've got the kings of the northern kingdom until they're taken away by the Assyrians in 722 BC. So what the periods then are, the United Kingdom, that's where we are right now. This is it, right here. And when Solomon dies, we'll enter the time known as divided kingdom. And then when Assyria falls, when Assyria captures Israel and Israel falls, that leaves Judah alone as the surviving kingdom here, which also goes into captivity. And so at this point, what all you have left in the Old Testament is the return and rebuilding, otherwise known on this chart as the restoration. So that to me is just a pretty good overview of Old Testament history and helping us to see where we are now, what has been covered to this point, and then what is coming up after this to the end of the Old Testament. Then remember, you've got 400 years of silence, and then the New Testament begins. So that's just a little bit of an overview of where we are. Now here's something that I've made copies of and going to pass this out at the end of class, and these are already punched. Keith punched those for me, so they'll fit in your notebook. Those of you that are keeping a notebook, if you keep adding handouts like this, you're going to have a lot of helpful material along. But what this does, this particular chart, is just to focus on that period known as the United Kingdom, where we are right now. And the good thing, well, several things about this, the timeline part of it. You know, when it mentions the Battle of Ebenezer, that, of course, was in the days of Samuel. So you've got the reign of Saul and the passages that go with the reign of Saul. 1 Samuel 11 and following. And really, it's going to be to the end of this chapter. But then you've got David's reign, which is at first in Hebron and then over all of Israel, and the passages that go with the reign of David. From 1 Samuel 16, where he is anointed, that's referenced, but really his reign as king is in 2 Samuel 1 through 24, and then 1 Chronicles 11 through 29. And then, of course, you've got the reign of Solomon that starts in the year 971 BC and continues to his death in 931 BC. So this chart's going to give you the three kings of the United Kingdom, passages that go with that. The temple is started in Solomon's reign, starting in the year 966, and it takes 7 years to build the temple. So anyway, that's mentioned, as well as the geographical area that of the kingdom that was ruled over by these kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. In the days of Solomon, it reaching all the way to the Euphrates River. That's a little bit off the map. And remember, Solomon put a navy of ships that were stationed right here at Ezion-Geber, which is also known as Eilat. E-L-A-T-H, Eilat, which is right here at the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, right there. So, and this is the Wadi El Arish, which is the border between Israel's territory and Egypt's territory, right there. So anyway, that's something that I'm going to give you at the end of class to just go along with where we are. I want you to get the utmost out of our study in terms of not only the passages we're looking at, but again, biblical context, as well as any other background and helpful information that we can have. So an important part in the history of God's people. Okay, 1 Samuel 25, and I did not make a note of who took the last question and where we start this morning. Can someone help me on that? Okay. That's the first time I've seen her in a while. Yeah. So where are we going or coming? So Wes is the one to start us. Is that what you're saying? All right. Number 1 on 1 Samuel 25, Wes.
What significant death occurs at this time, Samuel?
Okay. It's interesting to see a life from its beginning all the way to its end, and the outcome of that. That's what we see when we look at Samuel. Number 2 is next. Warren, number 2. Avery, would you like to take number 2? Okay. 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 Just whatever's in your hand, whatever you'd like to give as a gift. Anne, were you wanting to take number 3? Yeah. Of course, as Hank pointed out, David is the hero of Israel. Everybody knew about the man that killed the giant. And all these valiant battles, wherever he went, the Lord was with him. He behaved himself wisely. And so all of this was just entirely vindictive and hateful. And he knew very well who David was. He just didn't want to extend help. Number 4 is next. Donna, did you want to take number 4? Okay. Emily, would you like to take number 5? Okay, thank you. Emily, have I told you I'm glad you're here? All right, I'm still glad you're here. James, next. David Earl. All right, up here, Bill, not with you, number 6. Bill? All right. Sounded like you were trying to clear your throat there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's call her Ahinoam. How about that? Abigail, Ahinoam, and then Michael. Ahinoam. 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 All right, well, good. I'm glad. Number 7 is next. It tells us that it follows up on that. Number 7. All right. Saul gave her to Palti. Now, looking ahead, I just mentioned that David is king just over Hebron for the first 7 years. Then all Israel came to him and asked that he be made king of all Israel. The first thing that David said when that proposal was made to him is, "Restore my wife to me." And so at that point, Michal was brought back to him. And well, it was a hateful move. He was doing that to spite David, basically, is what that amounts to. Well, I don't know. I would like to think he loved her. But I do want to restate something. Instead of when he was king over all Israel, I want to say that that's actually earlier. That's in chapter 3 when he's still king in Hebron, where that is found. So that's when Abner is talking to him, and the interesting thing is that Palti walks with her, and I'm looking at 2 Kings 3, and not to belabor the point, but Michal is sent back, and verse 16 says, "Then her husband went along with her to Baharim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, 'Go, return.'" Now see, here's the thing. You got an example in Scripture where a man's wife is taken from him, and David had nothing to do with that. She's married to Palti, and David then, when he's in position to retrieve her, asks that she be brought back. And he's saying, "I won't talk to you." Abner any further. I won't make a covenant unless, first of all, verse 13, you won't see my face unless you bring Michal back to me. So apparently, Palti is emotionally involved, and he likes her too because he's walking as far as he can. You know, he's accompanying her as she's leaving him to go back to David, and he's weeping. And I have no doubt that the tears were genuine. But the thing is, he had no right to her. And the truth of the matter is, I cannot feel a great deal of sympathy for Palti. He accepted her as wife. He got into that situation. And the Bible teaches that the way of the transgressor is hard. But you know, you can see the emotional arguments. Well, he really loved her, and he's weeping. You know, he doesn't want her to leave him, and you know. But when people enter into a relationship that does not have God's approval, emotions can be involved, shedding of tears can be involved, but it wasn't right for him to continue in that relationship. And so that's, see, the thing about it is, from a human standpoint, you read that, you read in 2 Samuel 3 and verse 16, he's walking, he's going with her, and he's weeping behind her, and but I want to tell you, you're doing yourself more harm than good if you're feeling sorry for Palti. And when our sympathy is with somebody that is in wrongdoing, we're misplacing the sympathy. That's not what is needed. That doesn't help anything. Now that's just a by the way point. That's just totally by the way. Except it's kind of the rest of the story about what happens with this wife when you see what happens about her being taken, as 1 Samuel 15 is here pointing out at the end of the chapter. Well, we need to continue, don't we? Anybody have a question or comment? I've never seen anything archaeologically that would indicate boots. It would be basically leather, footwear. Might have straps that, you know, come on up to the ankle, that sort of thing. Yeah. So what are we going to do? In chapter 26, the Ziphites, these Ziphites, have we come across Ziphites before? Anybody remember about the Ziphites? Look back to 1 Samuel 23. 1 Samuel 23. Remember the chapter where David delivers the residents of Hakilah, and Saul. Well, this is really great on Saul's part. When Saul hears that this has happened in 1 Samuel 23 and verse 7, Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand. Have you ever seen somebody do that? That what they're doing, they've taken a route that you know is opposing the will of God. It's not what God would have them do at all. But then they continue to say, I know that God wants me to do this, and keep invoking the name of God. And you see, that's not what God wanted at all. And so, oh, God has delivered him into my hand. But anyway, these Ziphites. So David's having to flee. He leaves Hakilah. And in 1 Samuel 23 and verse 19, the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding with us in the strongholds in the hill of Hakilah, which is on the south of Yeshimon? And so therefore come down and we'll deliver you. And so now in verse 21, Saul does it again. Saul said, blessed are you of the Lord, for you've had compassion on me. It just makes me cringe when he keeps talking about God's name when he's rebelling against God. And he keeps saying, yes, God is doing this for me. I know this is God's plan for me. He wants me to do this thing. So I want to tell you, all those passages in the Bible that warn about deception, about being deceived, and even about deceiving yourself, they're not there for nothing. you can reach the point you are so self-deceived, you really think that, God, you have God's approval, and He's opening these doors for you. And just like with Saul, that wasn't the case at all. That was not it at all. Couldn't be further from the truth. But anyway, these Ziphites, where you start out in chapter 26, that are here volunteering to tell Saul where David is. They're the ones that were also mentioned, and where Saul brings his forces, and he's closing in, just right there. And then a messenger came and said, the Philistines are attacking us. And so Saul had to leave off his pursuit of David and go. That's how 1 Samuel 23 ends. So 24 was the deal at En-Gedi, taking 3,000 chosen men. So here we start out with the Ziphites once again. And so Saul arose and went to the wilderness of Ziph. So this area here is the wilderness area. All of this area counted to the south is wilderness. But Ziph is mentioned as a reference point right here. I've already shown you En-Gedi just a while ago. Carmel is where Nabal was from. Carmel and Maon are mentioned in connection with the events of chapter 25 that we just talked about. So you see, like I said earlier, this is the Dead Sea. And so much of where we are with David, it's here to the south. Everything's in the south. You're not going up to Galilee and different places for the most part. I mean, we saw David coming over here to Moab to give his family some sanction so they'd be out of Saul's reach. But otherwise, everything's kind of in the south there. So in verse 2, in verse 1, they came to Saul at where? At Gibeah. So, okay, here are the Ziphites. They came to Saul at Gibeah. Do you see where Gibeah is right up here? Way to remember where Gibeah is. See, this is Jerusalem, and Gibeah is just due north of Jerusalem. So it's real close. It's really no more than about 3 miles away. So Gibeah, this is Gibeah right here, situated on a hill. And so this is where Saul's capital was. This is where he was reigning. This is where he was in chapter 26 and verse 1. So they came to Gibeah here, but Saul rose and went into the wilderness of Ziph. So he's going down to the south. And notice that he takes with him these 3,000 chosen men. So he's taking the best of the soldiers of Israel. He's pulling all these resources. He is the king. He's supposed to be involved in administration. He's supposed to be looking out after the welfare of Israel. But see, have you ever heard the expression tunnel vision? You know what that means? Tunnel vision. And you can get so focused when one is in a sinful condition. You can get so focused. I've got to have this one thing. I've got to do this one thing, that nothing else matters. You know, it's like the horse that has the blinders on, can't see anything except, just what's straight ahead. And you can see here is somebody that is just obsessed with destroying David, and it's for no reason at all. And he never stops to, David's my problem. If I could just get rid of David. And he never stops to think, what about my relationship with God? What changes do I need to make? I need to humble myself. I need to repent. But those kind of things you see are not the course that he's taking. So 3,000 chosen men. And this is right after. Remember in chapter 24? Where's all that acknowledgement? You remember I said he was weeping? And I made the point that unless we change the heart, that just to cry and become emotional, it isn't really any good. Remember we mentioned that in 1 Samuel 24. And so he's acknowledging his fault, that kind of thing, and speaking well of David in chapter 24. It just doesn't last long. And lessons are there for the learning. It's not enough to say, oh, I'm so disappointed with myself. Oh, I've just done what's wrong, and even to cry about it and become emotional about it. If you don't truly repent, and if you don't deal with the heart, if no change of heart is made, just being emotional and crying and talking about it won't get it. And yet a lot of times people think if you've done the one that you've done the other. That if there are tears shed, if you talk, well, I need to do better, but that's the same thing as actually doing better. But it's not. And Saul's a real good example of that. So, in other words, here he is again. The only thing that's happened is, in between chapter 24 and 26, is that's where, David's had to, with his men, do the best he could just to survive and stay out of Saul's reach. So here we are, and Saul is at it. He is at it again. So again, notice is not David hiding in the hill of Hakilah. The BibleAtlas.com, .org, I should say, places Hakilah just due east of Ziph. In other words, it's kind of between En-Gedi and Ziph, right there. So that's the reference point that is made in that verse. So what's going to happen here is that David in verse 4 sent out spies because Saul is wanting to keep up with David's whereabouts, but it's in David's best interest to keep up with Saul's whereabouts and to know if Saul is indeed after him again. And so he sends out his spies, and they came back, no doubt, with a report, sure enough, yeah, he's coming. 3,000 men with him, yeah. So they could, it says, and understood that Saul had indeed come, see in verse 4. So all that is telling you that they do have confirmation of his whereabouts. So David does something interesting here. It's the same principle, but it's different than what we saw at En-Gedi. At this time, David approaches the camp, and it's at night, and everyone's asleep. And he asked the question, he said in verse 7, who will go with me? Who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And he mentions here that this is spoken to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab. Now this is our first mention of Abishai, the brother of Zeruiah. Abishai is David's nephew, the son of David's sister. First mention of him, but he's going to be mentioned lots of times. He was very loyal to David. He really loved David, and he was a good warrior. And so he says, Abishai is the one that says, I will go down with you. Now, what I'd like to know is, what about Ahimelech? Does he not say anything? But it just says, Abishai says, I'll go. So the two went. I mean, David didn't want a whole bunch of people going with him. That would defeat his purpose. So it's just David and Abishai that walk into the camp. And we learn later that there's divine intervention, that God had caused a deep slumber, a deep sleep to call upon the people. So nobody, to fall upon the people. So nobody rouses. And so David actually just walks right up to where Saul is, and Abishai is with him. And Abishai says, let me strike him. And he said, I won't have to do it twice. I won't have to strike him a second time. And so Abishai is whispering to David. It's like, just say the word. Just say the word. I'll strike him, and I won't have to strike him a second time. And we won't be running like this. We won't be hiding from him. This will be the end of all your troubles. You just say the word, David. And David says, do not destroy him. And what restrains David, of course, he's not killed any fellow Israelites, period. He almost did in the previous chapter, but he listened to Abigail's counsel. Up until now, he's been fighting the enemies of the Lord. But besides just being an Israelite, what is it that restrains David? He says, what does he keep talking about here? He is the anointed of the Lord. Who can stretch his hand against Yahweh's anointed and be guiltless? And David went on to say, It's kind of like we would say sometimes, you're leaving it in God's hands, right? And that's what David does basically in the 10th verse. He says, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him. Or, his day shall come to die. Or, he shall go out to battle and perish. In other words, any of these things could happen. But he says in verse 11, the Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Hank mentioned last week in Romans the 12th chapter, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. But David does say this. He says, take now the spear and the jug of water that are by his head, and let us go. And so David did that. He took the spear and jug of water by Saul's head. And they got away. No one saw or knew it or awoke. They were all asleep because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. The details of the Bible sometimes are interesting to me. I mean, all the Bible's interesting to me. Sometimes, for example, in Luke chapter 1, when it talks about the silence being broken and the angel Gabriel appearing to Zacharias when he's inside the holy place to burn incense. And it says in Luke the first chapter that the angel was standing on the right side of the altar. I mean, what difference does it make where he was standing? Or what difference does it make which side of the altar? But just a detail, even the very spot he was standing when this important announcement was made. And usually a jug of water would have no significance. A jug of water, or a bottle of water, a skin of water. But I will tell you, even today, as you travel to this part of Israel, it's always warm as a rule, and in the summertime it's just really hot. And one thing that a guide will tell you when you take a group to this part of Israel, and the moment you get out of the motor coach, for example, take your water bottle with you. I don't know how many times I've heard that. Take your water bottle with you. Because you don't even know how fast it can happen. I mean, just in a matter of hours, you can dehydrate. And so the point of it is here, they're in the south. They're in the desert. Saul with his 3,000 men, and he's got a jug of water. When you're in that, and see, it's just always the Word of God is true in details, and it's consistent with everything that we can know like that. And so that's why you have a jug of water. You're in the desert, and you better have water with you. This spear would have been stuck in the ground. That's what verse 7 says. And that wouldn't mean, by the way, the pointed end. You don't stick the spear end, the pointed end, in the ground, because that would dull the point. Anybody knows that. But it's the other end. The other end, you stick it in the ground. So it's right close there. But you're sleeping, and if you sleep, how close do you think the spear would be to you? And how close would the water be to you? You want to get up and have to go somewhere to get your water? Go up and walk somewhere to get your spear? Well, no, it's right there. So if you wake up and realize that somebody has taken both the jug of water and the spear, what do you know they very well could have done? Is there any question about that? I mean, you wouldn't have to have somebody explain it to you. Well, have you thought about this? That'd be the first thing you'd think of. So that's what happened. So what David does is to go at verse 13 says, a great distance. A great distance. But David knew about acoustics. He didn't have Larry's PA system over there, but he knew where you could stand and you could shout and be heard, but he's a distance away. And so then all of a sudden he starts talking to Abner. Now David has 3,000 soldiers, chosen soldiers, but who's in charge? And who's responsible ultimately? I'm sorry. Let me back up. Sorry about that. Saul's men. He's got 3,000 soldiers. Who's in charge? Abner's in charge. Who's responsible for Saul's safety? Abner. So it's not like these other soldiers don't matter, but he's dealing directly with the leader. And so, do you not answer, Abner? Abner, who are you, calling out to the king? David uses some sarcasm, a bit of ridicule. Are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why have you not guarded your lord the king? One of the people came in to destroy your lord the king. Now, again, David is being rhetorical with this. In other words, that's what could have happened, and David was there. He could have done that. This thing you've done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die because you've not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. And by the way, take a look and see where the king's spear is. Where's his water jug, Abner? Well, instead of Abner answering back, what the text says is Saul answers. Is that your voice, my son David? Where's all this, my son David? 3,000 chosen men to kill. Is that you, my son David? It's my voice, O Lord the king. And so David again, tries to plead with him. Why are you doing this? What have I done? He says, let the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, if somehow your behavior is coming from the Lord, if this is punishment somehow that the Lord is behind, then let him accept an offering. Let's offer an offering of sacrifice. If it's the children of men, if men are putting you up to do this, may they be accursed. For they've driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. So now do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to seek a flea as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. I mean, you stand back and look at it. Doesn't it really look absurd what David is doing? So Saul says, what? I have sinned. Then it's, okay, you can come back to Israel. He says, return, my son David, for I will harm you no more. The thing is, you judge a tree by its fruits. And David had no reason to trust Saul's words here any more than he did in chapter 24 when Saul turned around and did the same thing. So what David said is, send somebody, let one of the young men come over and get your spear. And so that's verse 22. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Indeed, as your life was valued much this day in my eyes, so let my life be valued much in the eyes of the Lord. Let him deliver me out of all tribulation. So Saul says, may you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things and will also prevail. So David went his way and Saul returned to his place. So that means Saul basically says, Abner, tell the men, let's go back home. So Saul went to his place. He went to Gibeah. And David went on his way. But chapter 27 tells us what David knew. He said, I'll perish someday by the hand of Saul. It's like as long as he's alive, I won't be out of danger. And so earlier he had thought about this going to the Philistine area of Gath, and now he does that again. And you say, well, yeah, that didn't work before. Well, that was then, this is now. He's going to try it again. And he dwelt with Achish at Gath, and he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his two wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the Carmelitess, and Nabal's widow. And so when Saul was told David had fled to Gath, he sought him no more. So let's see what we're learning here. Our situation is going to change from the wilderness of Ziph to Saul going back to his place. Now David says, let's go to Philistia. And so he goes to Gath. Do you see Gath right there? Gath. And this is what it looks like as you fly over Gath today. A lot of excavation is being done there even now. I forget how many seasons, but it's really kind of a double tell. This and this, that's Gath. And so this is where David went. That's where he was for this time. But he said to Achish, if I found favor in your eyes. By the way, Achish could be a dynasty name. Some scholars point out that this might have been the successor of the previous Achish of Gath. But he says, give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there. Why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. You know, it really is not that unusual. If you've got a man that's loyal, he's got a group of men, you know, kind of like the feudal system, you know, but here, okay, here you can have this city will be yours. What this would do is it would get David away from the Pentapolis. It would get him away from the royal cities, and it's also getting him away from Saul. And so he asked for a place, and so he is given a place called Ziklag. Ziklag, which is right here on the map. Ziklag is way out in an area that's not really close to a town today. It is an area that is cultivated. And what you can do is you can see the tell, which is very well defined. Brother Jenkins and I, in a rental car, spent several hours trying to locate this and could not go the way that you'd usually go because it had rained and it was muddy and you would be stuck. So we went another route. I mean, we were driving through fields, not right in the middle of it, but in the edge like where tractors would go, but to get to this spot. So Ziklag is where David is going to live. Now from here, this will be his base of operation, where he's going to be attacking Amalekites and other enemies of God's people. And he's going to be getting spoils from the battle, and he's going to send those to Judah, and said that this is from David. And so when Achish is going to say, well, how did it go? He's going to say, well, I attacked some towns in Judah. And Achish is thinking, this is great because he'll be Saul's enemy forever. So David was not forthright of course, with the Philistine king, and that really is what you have down through verse 12 right there. Okay, so in chapter 28, it happened in those days. I wanted to amaze Hank this morning by seeing how much ground I could cover. See, this is 26, 27, now we're in chapter 28. I'm just kidding, sort of. But in chapter 28, in those days the Philistines gathered their army for war to fight with Israel, and Achish said to David, you're going to go with me to battle. And David gives kind of an ambiguous statement in verse 2. He says, surely you know what your servant can do. And so Achish says, you'll be one of my chief guardians forever. In other words, a bodyguard. So again it says, Samuel had died. Israel had lamented for him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. Saul had put the mediums and the spiritists out of the land. And so the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped against Shunem. And Saul and all of Israel came together. They encamped against Gilboa. So Saul is very afraid. And verse 6, the various ways that God ordinarily would speak, he's not speaking to Saul. In verse 6, the Lord did not answer him either by dreams, that's one way God spoke, or by Urim, remember the Urim and Thummim, he's not answering that way, or by the prophets. And so what Saul does is to say, find me a woman who is a medium, and he goes to Endor, and which is to the north near Jezreel. And so he's going to make his way up there, and to her surprise, she brings Samuel up. And again, this is the Lord's doing. But what Samuel does is to basically confirm what has already been said. Verse 17, the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. And the other thing that he mentions, and of course, verse 18, he mentions his disobedience with the Amalekites. And tomorrow, verse 19 says, you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. That Hadean realm, the realm of the dead, the realm of Sheol, is what he means when he says you'll be with me. Not in paradise, but in the Hadean realm. And so here is the word tomorrow, you and your sons. So that's actually, the text here is looking ahead to what happens. And what I'm wanting to do is to skip over just what's coming up right there to get on track with where we are right here. Notice Gibeah, notice the Philistines, notice the scene right here as the text says. It tells us that the Philistines are stationed at Shunem. The Israelites are at Mount Gilboa. And so it's just north of there that Saul goes to this sorceress of Endor. Let me show you this again on the map. Shunem is here. Mount Gilboa, and where the battle is going to be in chapter 31 coming up, is here. And just north is where the sorceress lived. So again, this is where we are right here in 1 Samuel 28. Philistines encamped at Shunem. You remember the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings 4? One of my favorite characters. Let me show you something. Let's stand right along over here, and we're going to look. And this right here, see these white buildings right in the middle, right there, in the middle of this cultivation? That is Shunem. And so this is where the Philistines were encamped, and kind of where we're standing, this is where Saul's men were encamped. And so now you get another view. This is Gilboa here, where the battle is going to take place, and where it says the Israelites were encamped. So I know we've not finished chapter 28, but that gives you the setting for what happens there, and actually covers most of the main points of the chapter. By the way, this is at the top of Beit Shan, the place where Saul and his sons, their bodies were nailed, and it's looking across to Mount Gilboa where the battle took place. But we're over here where the bodies were taken after Saul's head was cut off. Well, let's bring them in. Some of you brethren would help me. This is the chart I was telling you about. If some of you will pass this out, please. Bill, if you'll kind of divvy that up for me.